By the time Vivian built her criminal empire on my stolen ranch, I already owned the mineral rights beneath every mansion in her development. But let me back up. Picture this. I'm dodging mortars in Eastern Europe, serving my country, when I get a call that makes my blood run cold. Some HOA, which named Vivian, has legally sold my grandfather's ranch. 1,500 acres of prime American soil that's been in my family since 1892. The same land where my Purple Heart grandfather is buried. Sold for pennies on the dollar while I'm bleeding for freedom overseas. I come home to the sound of gravel crunching under surveyor boots, watching strangers stake out my family cemetery. Vivian thought she'd stolen everything from a broken veteran who couldn't fight back. What she didn't know was that Grandpa had left me one final gift buried in those 1960s property documents. Legal ownership of the ground beneath 50 luxury homes worth $47 million combined. What would you do if you came home to find your inheritance stolen? Drop a flag emoji. Where are you watching from? Because this could happen to anyone anywhere in America. This is how one veteran turned an HOA land grab into the most expensive property lesson these thieves ever received. My name is Staff Sergeant Ezra Thornfield, and I'm a third-generation rancher who just spent 18 months keeping the peace in Eastern Europe. While I was dodging bullets and missing my grandfather's funeral, some HOA vulture was circling my inheritance like a hungry buzzard. The Thornfield Ranch, 1,500 acres of rolling hills, pristine pastures, and the clearest spring-fed lake this side of the Rocky Mountains. Grandpa built this place from nothing after World War II, using his GI Bill and Purple Heart pension. Every fence post driven by weathered hands that knew real work. Every barn beam cut from our own timber. This wasn't just property. It was 3 generations of American blood, sweat, and tears. The ranch borders an exclusive development called Willowmere Estates. 50 lakefront mansions where tech executives and trust fund babies pay $200,000 to $500,000 for the privilege of living next to real America. These people have never worked a day of honest labor, but they sure know how to complain about the smell of cattle and the sound of roosters at dawn. I pull into my driveway after that nightmare flight from Germany, expecting to see familiar pastures. Instead, I'm hit with the acrid smell of fresh surveyor paint marking century-old oak trees like death sentences. Bright orange sold signs stab into my family's soil like daggers. Surveyors with clipboards are mapping my land, driving stakes through Grandpa's prized rose garden, where the scent of crushed petals now mixes with diesel fuel from their equipment. 800 acres gone. Allegedly sold to the Willowmere HOA for $2.3 million. That's robbery at $2,175 per acre for land worth at least $8,000. My savings account shows $247. My remaining 700 acres are suddenly under development restrictions that nobody can explain. But here's what made my blood boil. They'd fenced off our family cemetery. The sound of chain link rattling in the wind around my grandfather's fresh grave still haunts my dreams. That's when I meet Vivian Ashworth. Picture every nightmare HOA president rolled into one perfectly crafted package. 52 years old, drives a white Mercedes G-Wagon worth more than most people's annual salary, and measures grass height with an actual ruler. This woman has filed 47 HOA violation complaints in the past year alone. Her victims probably just wanted to live in peace. She's standing in my driveway wearing a smirk that could curdle milk. Military housing allowance doesn't cover property taxes, does it, soldier boy? She says, not bothering with introductions. She shoves forged documents at me. Papers claiming tax delinquency that my bank records prove never existed. Your grandfather should have planned better, she continues, adjusting designer sunglasses that cost more than my monthly combat pay. This is what happens when military families think they're above civic responsibility. I'm standing there in my uniform, fresh off 18 months defending her freedom. And this parasite lectures me about patriotism. The irony burns like tear gas. Leave our property immediately, or I'll have you arrested for trespassing, she threatens, speed dialing what I assume is her personal sheriff. Here's my nightmare. Divorce lawyers and legal fees had drained my savings to $247. The local attorney, Vivian's golf partner, who couldn't take my case due to conflicts. County clerk's office lost all original property records. My bank claimed no record of automatic tax payments I'd religiously set up. Standing there watching strangers stake out my grandfather's grave, I made a silent promise. Vivian had no idea who she was messing with. But something about Grandpa's knowing smile and his old photos suggested he'd left me more than just land. Military training teaches patience, strategy, and finding enemy weak points. She was about to learn why you never mess with a combat veteran's family legacy. Vivian wasn't content with just stealing my land. She wanted to destroy my reputation, too. Within 48 hours of our first meeting, she filed a restraining order, claiming I'd threatened her with military-style violence. Complete fabrication. But the local judge rubber-stamped it without even hearing my side. Suddenly, I'm banned from half my own county. But that was just the opening move. She installed military-grade security cameras pointed directly at my remaining property, recording my every move like I was some kind of terrorist. Then came the neighborhood app posts about aggressive veteran behavior and concerning PTSD episodes. The woman was building a narrative, painting me as the dangerous outsider, threatening their perfect suburban paradise. Her crown jewel was hosting community safety meetings about undesirable elements in the area. The smell of her expensive perfume couldn't mask the stench of her bigotry as she orchestrated my character assassination with surgical precision. But here's what Vivian underestimated. Military intelligence training doesn't just disappear when you take off the uniform. While she was playing social media games, I was playing chess. And I remembered something my grandfather once told me. When politicians lie, the truth is always in the paperwork they hope you'll never find. I drove 200 miles to the state archives in the capital, spending my last $47 on gas and parking fees. Those dusty basement files held treasures more valuable than Vivian's entire jewelry collection. Original 1892 land grant documents, my grandfather's Purple Heart citations, and the smoking gun, proof that my property was never delinquent on taxes. Every payment documented and filed, every transaction recorded and stamped. The tax payments Vivian claimed never existed. They'd been systematically redirected to the wrong account through a convenient clerical error. One-digit difference. During my divorce proceedings, my attorney had warned me about this exact scam. How corrupt officials redirect payments to create artificial delinquencies, then swoop in for pennies on the dollar. He'd said property owners have redemption rights even after fraudulent sales, and military personnel get extra protections under federal law. I just never thought I'd need that knowledge myself. The county assessor who approved this emergency sale lives in a $340,000 mansion at 47 Willowmere Drive. Talk about convenient timing. But here's where Vivian's greed became her downfall. Her emergency sale happened exactly 30 days before the legal minimum waiting period. She was so confident in her corruption that she couldn't even wait for her theft to be technically legal. In her rush to steal my inheritance, she'd created a paper trail that screamed fraud louder than a smoke detector at 3 a.m. armed with this evidence. I expected some justice. Instead, Vivian doubled down like a cornered rattlesnake. She hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on my divorce, my deployment record, anything to discredit my claims. Local newspaper coverage painted me as a troubled veteran, unable to accept civilian authority. The editor's wife lives at 23 Willowmere Drive. Small world, right? Then came the harassment campaign. Noise complaints every time I started my tractor before 8 a.m. Sheriff's deputies citing me for disturbing the peace when I ran cattle on my own land. Citations for unauthorized construction when I fixed my own fence. It was like living in a police state, except the dictator wore designer yoga pants and drove a Mercedes. But Vivian's masterpiece was pure evil genius. I found surveyor stakes driven through my grandfather's prized rose garden at 3 a.m. destroying 60-year-old heritage plants that couldn't be replaced. Security footage showed the HOA groundskeeper following orders that could only have come from one person. When I confronted her, Vivian's response was ice cold. Those roses were encroaching on community property. We have standards to maintain. Standing there among the crushed petals, breathing in the scent of destruction mixed with diesel fuel from their equipment, I realized this wasn't just about money. This was about power. Vivian got off on crushing people who couldn't fight back. Too bad for her. She'd picked the wrong veteran to mess with. Vivian's response to my evidence was like watching a poker player go Allen with a pair of twos. She hired the most expensive law firm in the state capital. The kind of place where hourly rates start at $800 and the marble lobby makes you feel poor just walking through it. Within a week, I was served with a lawsuit claiming aggressive trespassing and property damage, seeking $500,000 in damages plus legal fees. Her masterstroke claiming I'd driven my cattle across HOA property, which was actually my own stolen land. The legal papers described my grandfather's prize Angus bulls as dangerous livestock deliberately weaponized against innocent homeowners. I had to read that line 3 times before I stopped laughing. Apparently, cows are now considered assault weapons in Vivian's twisted universe, but 2 can play the expensive lawyer game. I contacted the Military Legal Aid Society, explaining my situation to a crusty old JAG officer who'd seen every scam in the book. "Son," he said, his voice crackling through the phone like autumn leaves. "This smells fishier than a week-old salmon. Let me make some calls." Those calls connected me with Sarah Chun, a property rights attorney from the neighboring state who specialized in HOA abuse cases. She worked pro bono for veterans, having lost her own father's farm to similar corruption. During our first meeting, she pulled out a thick file folder and said something that made my day. "Most HOAs operate illegally due to paperwork lapses, and yours might be no exception." That's when we started digging into Willow's corporate structure. What we found was beautiful. The HOA had never properly incorporated with the state. They'd been operating as an illegal quasi-governmental entity for 3 years, collecting fees without legal authority, making rules they had no power to enforce. It was like discovering the neighborhood bully was actually a 90-pound weakling wearing a fake muscle suit. During my deployment, I learned that many organizations fail to renew their corporate registration every few years, turning them into paper tigers with no legal standing. Sarah explained that homeowners can challenge the authority of improperly incorporated HOAs and potentially void all their actions. She'd seen cases where residents got years of fees refunded because their HOA forgot to file a single form. But here's where it gets juicy. While investigating their corporate status, we discovered Vivian had personally profited from my land sale. Her landscaping company, Ashworth Aesthetics, received a $180,000 beautification contract from the HOA the same month they acquired my property. She'd literally paid herself with money from selling my inheritance. It was like watching someone rob a bank and then bill the bank for security consulting. Sarah filed a motion to dismiss all HOA actions based on their illegal corporate status. The courtroom was packed when Vivian's $800 per hour attorney had to explain why his client was essentially a criminal organization masquerading as a homeowners association. Watching him squirm was better than cable television. But Vivian wasn't going down without a fight. She called an emergency HOA meeting to retroactively approve all past actions and rush through incorporation paperwork. Only 12 of 50 homeowners attended. Most were traveling or simply fed up with her antics. At 11 p.m., with a skeleton crew of her cronies, she pushed through votes that would normally require a majority of all residents. The smell of desperation was stronger than the coffee they'd been serving since 6 p.m. Vivian's voice had that shrill quality of someone who knows their world is crumbling, but refuses to admit defeat. 2 days later, another process server arrived at my door with a new lawsuit, this time for $1.2 million in punitive damages. She claimed my frivolous legal challenges constituted harassment and threatened to seize my remaining 700 acres to satisfy the judgment. The woman had more nerve than a novice skydiver, but her legal position was weaker than wet tissue. Paper. Standing on my porch reading those papers while my grandfather's wind chimes played their familiar melody, I realized Vivian had just made a fatal mistake. In her panic to stop my momentum, she'd escalated to a level that would bring serious scrutiny to her entire operation. The sound of those chimes reminded me of something Grandpa used to say: when your enemy is making mistakes, don't interrupt them. I was about to let Vivian dig her own grave as deep as she wanted. Vivian's paranoia was reaching legendary levels. Having failed to crush me with lawsuits, she turned her sights on every homeowner in Willower Estates like a dictator purging potential rebels. Christmas lights left up past January 2nd. That'll be a $200 fine. Someone dared to plant tomatoes in their backyard. $500 penalty for unauthorized agricultural activities. The woman was fining people for living their lives. Her masterpiece of petty tyranny came when she threatened to foreclose on elderly Margaret Clearwater's home over $45 in late fees. Margaret, a retired third-grade teacher whose husband died of cancer the previous year, had been struggling to keep up with HOA demands while grieving. Vivian's response: grief doesn't excuse financial irresponsibility. That's when the community finally woke up. You can only kick a sleeping dog so many times before it bites back. And Willow residents had reached their breaking point. Margaret started a private Facebook group called Willow Truthtellers that grew from 5 members to 43 in 2 weeks. The horror stories they shared could fill a Stephen King novel. Navy veteran Tom Bridgewater, whose meticulously maintained lawn had earned him 3 separate violations for excessive uniformity, became my unlikely ally. During a chance encounter at the hardware store where we were both buying security cameras, he pulled me aside and said, "That woman's crazier than a soup sandwich, son. What can we do to stop her?" I started organizing Know Your Rights workshops at the local library, sharing everything Sarah and I had learned about HOA law. The first meeting drew 8 curious neighbors. The second drew 22. By the third, we had standing room only with people taking notes like their lives depended on it, which, considering Vivian's escalating tyranny, they probably did. During one of these sessions, Margaret dropped a bombshell that changed everything. While cleaning out her late husband's papers, she'd found the original HOA covenants from 1965 tucked away in their attic like buried treasure. Her husband had been on the original development committee, and he'd kept everything. The brittle yellow pages contained language that made my heart sing. The bylaws explicitly prohibited any land acquisition beyond the original 50-lot plat. Vivian's purchase of my property didn't just violate state law. It violated the HOA's own founding documents. She'd committed what lawyers call ultra vires acts, meaning she'd exceeded her legal authority so completely it was like a mayor trying to declare war on Canada. Sarah explained that when organizations act beyond their legal powers, those actions are void from the beginning, like they never happened at all. It was as if Vivian had been playing chess while everyone else was playing checkers, except she'd been moving pieces illegally the entire time. But Margaret wasn't done delivering knockout punches. Tom's investigation into the Community Pool Maintenance Fund revealed $89,000 missing over 3 years. The money had been flowing directly to Ashworth Aesthetics for services that were either never performed or grossly overpriced. While residents paid higher fees for pool repairs, Vivian was funding her personal landscaping empire with their money. The pool itself told the story. Green algae thick enough to walk on, broken filtration systems, and diving boards held together with duct tape and prayers. The smell of chlorine had been replaced by the stench of stagnant water that made you gag from 50 feet away. Yet somehow Vivian's company had built $30,000 for premium maintenance services just last year. When confronted at the next community meeting, Vivian's response was pure desperation disguised as authority. She hired 2 security guards to maintain order, scheduled votes during working hours when most residents couldn't attend, and threatened legal action against anyone spreading lies and misinformation about HOA finances. The meeting itself was like watching a dictatorship collapse. In real time, Vivian stood at the podium, her voice getting shriller with each challenge, while angry homeowners demanded answers she couldn't provide. The security guards looked increasingly uncomfortable as they realized they were protecting a tyrant from her own neighbors. "This is what happens when outside agitators infiltrate our peaceful community," she declared, pointing directly at me. "Certain people can't accept that property has changed hands legally." Margaret stood up, her teacher's voice cutting through the chaos like a sword through silk. "Vivian, I've lived here longer than you've been alive. This isn't about outside agitators. This is about a board member stealing from her own neighbors." The applause that followed shook the community center windows. Watching Vivian's face crumble as her own community turned against her was sweeter than my grandmother's apple pie. Her empire of petty tyranny was finally cracking, and the sound was beautiful. Sarah called me at 6:47 a.m. on a Tuesday. That changed everything. Her voice was shaking with excitement as she said, "Ezra, you need to sit down for this. I found something that makes Vivian's worst nightmare look like a pleasant dream." She'd been digging through the original 1960s development records when she discovered a legal technicality that would make corporate lawyers weep with joy. When Willow Estates was first developed, the original landowner, my grandfather's neighbor, had only sold the surface rights to the development company. He'd retained ownership of everything underground, mineral rights, subsurface access, and most importantly, Foundation support rights. My grandfather had quietly purchased those subsurface rights in 1963 for $500, thinking the mineral deposits might be valuable someday. What he'd actually bought was the legal foundation beneath every mansion in Willamere Estates. All 50 homes were technically built on property that now belonged to me. Sarah explained it like this. Imagine you own a house, but someone else owns the ground your basement sits in. That's exactly what had happened here. Surface rights and mineral rights are completely separate legal entities, something I'd learned during a geology course the Army had sent me to in Colorado. The instructor had told us about cases where homeowners discovered their houses were built on land they didn't actually own below ground level. The implications hit me like a freight train loaded with justice. I could legally demand the removal of every structure built on my subsurface property. The estimated cost for relocating 50 luxury homes somewhere between $12 and $15 million. Alternatively, the homeowners could purchase the subsurface rights from me at fair market value, which our appraiser estimated at $45 million for the entire development. When Sarah broke the news to Vivian's legal team, the $800 per hour attorney requested an emergency meeting that cost them $25,000 in one afternoon. Their conclusion was devastating for Vivian. My legal position was unassailable. No insurance company would cover property rights disputes of this magnitude. The foundation of their entire community, literally and figuratively, belonged to the veteran they'd tried to destroy. I watched Vivian's world crumble through my binoculars as moving trucks appeared in driveways throughout Willamere. Real estate agents swarmed the development like vultures at a roadkill buffet. Home values crashed overnight as word spread through the mortgage industry that title insurance might not cover these properties. The sound of Vivian's expensive fountain pen hitting the marble conference table during that emergency meeting, captured on security cameras she'd installed herself, became the audio signature of her downfall. Her $1.2 million mansion was now worth whatever I decided to charge for the land beneath it. Margaret called that evening, her teacher's voice bubbling with laughter. Ezra, honey, Vivian's been driving around the neighborhood for 3 hours, just circling like a lost dog. I think she's having some kind of breakdown. Tom was more direct. That woman thought she was playing chess with a country boy. Turns out you were playing three-dimensional chess while she was still learning checkers. The nuclear option was now in my hands. I could force the evacuation of every home in Willamere Estates, bankrupting 50 families to satisfy my desire for revenge. Or I could negotiate a settlement that would return my stolen land, plus enough compensation to make Vivian's theft the most expensive mistake in county history. But here's what Vivian didn't understand about military training. We're taught to achieve objectives with minimal collateral damage. The enemy was her, not the innocent homeowners who'd been deceived by her schemes. The leverage had shifted so completely that Vivian now faced a choice between financial ruin and criminal prosecution. Her stolen empire was built on land she'd never actually owned, and the foundation of her power was literally mine to control. Justice wasn't just coming. It was standing on my property wearing combat boots and carrying legal documents that would make her rue the day she'd tangled with a thornfield. When you hold nuclear weapons, you don't just push the button. You build a strategy that maximizes impact while minimizing fallout. Sarah assembled a legal dream team that would make Pentagon war planners jealous. A military property rights attorney who'd never lost a veteran's case, a forensic accountant who could trace dirty money through more layers than a wedding cake, and a real estate expert whose property valuations had stood up in Supreme Court cases. Our war room was my grandfather's old study, maps and documents covering every surface like a military operation. The smell of old leather and coffee mixed with the excitement of impending victory as we planned our three-phase campaign. Exposure, negotiation, and if necessary, total enforcement. Dr. Jennifer Walsh, our forensic accountant, had traced every stolen dollar with surgical precision. Vivian's embezzled $340,000 over 4 years, she announced, spreading financial charts across the oak table, pool maintenance, landscaping contracts, security services that were never provided. She's been running a one-woman crime syndicate disguised as community management. The evidence arsenal was devastating. Original mineral rights documents from 1963. Forensic analysis of the forged tax papers showing different ink types and printing dates. HOA financial records revealing a systematic pattern of self-doing that would make mob accountants blush. video evidence of illegal property modifications, all time-stamped and authenticated. But our secret weapon was Margaret, who'd become an inadvertent master spy. Her Wednesday Bridge Club included Vivian's closest allies, and elderly ladies apparently share more secrets than CIA operatives after 3 glasses of wine. Through Margaret's intelligence network, we learned about Vivian's Swiss bank account containing exactly $2.3 million, the amount she'd paid for my stolen property. Tom had organized something beautiful, a veterans support convoy from 4 counties, all coming to witness justice being served. These weren't weekend warriors. These were combat veterans, Purple Heart recipients, men and women who'd bled for the Constitution that Vivian had trampled. The sound of their motorcycles and pickup trucks would announce that America still protects those who've protected her. Our media strategy was surgical. I'd learned psychological warfare in the Army, and public opinion battles follow the same principles as combat operations. We prepared press packets highlighting the contrast between my grandfather's Bronze Star service and Vivian's theft of veteran property. Social media campaigns featuring the family cemetery behind enemy lines. Anonymous tips to investigative journalists about corruption in local government. Sarah had prepared multiple settlement scenarios from total victory to reasonable compromise. "Well, offer them 3 options," she explained, her voice carrying the confidence of someone holding royal flush. "Return all stolen property plus damages, purchase subsurface rights at fair market value, or face complete evacuation and criminal prosecution." The insurance revelation was our psychological warfare masterpiece. Homeowners' insurance policies specifically excluded property rights disputes. Title insurance companies were already refusing to defend the impossible position of owning homes built on someone else's land. Most residents would lose everything if forced to relocate their foundations. During our final strategy session, we discovered something that made victory even sweeter. The environmental engineer's soil analysis revealed that HOA construction had contaminated the lake with runoff from improperly installed drainage systems. Vivian's development violated EPA regulations, giving us federal jurisdiction and potential criminal charges that could add years to her eventual prison sentence. Margaret's infiltration of Vivian's inner circle produced our final intelligence coup. Vivian was planning to flee to Switzerland if the legal case went against her. Her escape plan included liquidating assets, transferring funds offshore, and disappearing before criminal charges could be filed. She'd underestimated how quickly federal authorities move when stolen military property is involved. The community mobilization was reaching critical mass. Margaret's homeowner revolt had collected signatures from 38 of 50 residents demanding Vivian's immediate removal from the board. Tom's recall petition exceeded the required threshold by 15 signatures. Local media was investigating after receiving our anonymous financial documents, and the state attorney general's office had opened a fraud investigation. As I sat in Grandpa's chair that final evening, surrounded by legal documents that would restore my family's honor, I felt his presence in the room. The dog tags hanging on his portrait seemed to catch the lamplight, reminding me that justice delayed isn't always justice denied. Sometimes it's justice perfected. Tomorrow, Vivian would learn why you never steal from a veteran's family. The war machine was assembled, loaded, and aimed directly at her corrupt empire. Time to pull the trigger and watch it all come crashing down. Desperation makes people dangerous, and Vivian was drowning in it. When legal warfare failed, she turned to sabotage with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. My water well, which had provided crystal-clear spring water for 3 generations, suddenly developed a mysterious crack that drained the entire system overnight. The repair estimate, $12,000. The contractor who accidentally hit it with his backhoe, listed in the county records as doing regular work for Ashworth Aesthetics. But Vivian was just getting started. Anonymous reports flooded the county environmental office, claiming my cattle operation was contaminating the pristine lake with military chemicals. The irony was thicker than molasses. The woman whose illegal construction had actually polluted the watershed was accusing me of environmental crimes. Health inspectors arrived with clipboards and attitudes, testing soil that came back cleaner than a surgical suite. Her psychological warfare campaign escalated to character assassination. Rumors spread through town like wildfire about my dangerous PTSD episodes and violent outbursts against innocent neighbors. The local diner owner, whose mortgage happened to be held by Vivian's bank, suddenly refused to serve me. The hardware store clerk gave me suspicious looks like I might explode at any moment. It was like living in a small town where everyone believed you were a ticking time bomb. Then came the bribery attempt that proved Vivian had completely lost her mind. She cornered me in the courthouse parking lot, her Mercedes idling like a getaway car, and offered me $500,000 cash to relocate somewhere more suitable for a veteran with your challenges. The way she said it made my skin crawl like I was damaged goods that needed to be warehoused away from decent society. Think about it, soldier, she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. Veterans with trauma need quiet environments. Suburban life might be too stimulating for someone like you. She actually suggested I'd be happier in some isolated cabin where my episodes wouldn't frighten normal people. What she didn't know was that I'd been recording every interaction since our first meeting. Her bribery attempt, complete with veiled threats about making my life very difficult, was captured in high-definition audio that would make prosecutors weep with joy. But Vivian saved her masterpiece for last. Professional vandals, and I mean professionals, not teenagers, with spray paint, systematically destroyed my perimeter fence on a Tuesday night when I was at the VA hospital for a routine appointment. They cut the wire with a surgical precision, creating gaps wide enough for my cattle to escape onto the busy county highway. At 3:47 a.m., I got the call every rancher dreads. One of my grandfather's prized Angus cows had been struck by a semi-truck, dying instantly on Route 42. The financial loss was devastating, but the emotional impact was worse. That cow had been descended from the original herd Grandpa built after the war. Vivian's response was as swift as it was sickening. She called the sheriff's department before the cow's body was even cold, claiming I was operating a dangerous livestock facility that threatens community safety. Local news crews arrived like buzzards, filming my dead cow while she gave interviews about reckless veterans who endanger innocent families. The headline in the morning paper made my blood boil. Troubled veterans' negligence causes highway accident. The article painted me as an unstable ex-soldier whose poor fence maintenance had nearly killed a truck driver. No mention of the professional sabotage. No investigation into who might have cut those wires. Just another story about a broken veteran who couldn't handle civilian responsibility. Meanwhile, Margaret's Bridge Club intelligence revealed Vivian's nuclear option. She was filing for emergency bankruptcy to protect her personal assets while transferring her mansion to a shell corporation in the Cayman Islands. The woman who'd spent 4 years stealing from her neighbors was now claiming financial hardship due to my frivolous lawsuits. The smell of hydraulic fluid from my sabotaged farm equipment mixed with the stench of Vivian's desperation as she played her final cards. Security cameras captured masked figures damaging machinery, cutting brake lines on my tractor, and even poisoning my grandfather's memorial oak tree with industrial herbicide. But every act of sabotage only strengthened our case. Sarah was documenting everything, building a criminal conspiracy case that would send Vivian to federal prison for years. The FBI Financial Crimes Unit had already frozen her Swiss accounts based on evidence we'd provided. Standing beside my grandfather's poisoned oak tree, watching its century-old leaves turn brown and curl, I realized Vivian had made a fatal mistake. She'd escalated from property theft to attempted murder. Those cut brake lines could have killed me. Her desperation had transformed her from a white-collar criminal into someone who belonged in maximum security. The sound of breaking glass echoed through the night as another accident damaged my security lights. But this time I was ready. Justice was coming, and it wore combat boots. Vivian's desperation reached psychotic levels when she realized bankruptcy wouldn't save her. Federal authorities had frozen her offshore accounts faster than she could say Cayman Islands, and her attempted asset shuffle looked like amateur hour compared to real financial criminals. So, she played the only card left in her deck, complete character destruction through manufactured evidence. The setup was diabolical in its simplicity. She hired a professional actor, a guy who looked enough like me to fool security cameras, to cause a disturbance at Murphy's Tavern on a busy Friday night. This fake Ezra started fights, threatened patrons, and screamed about killing HOA board members before stumbling out into the parking lot. Within hours, edited security footage was all over social media showing a dangerous veteran making terroristic threats. But her masterpiece of frame-up artistry came when she planted evidence in my truck during a routine traffic stop. The sheriff's deputy, whose daughter coincidentally attended private school on an anonymous scholarship from Ashworth Aesthetics, discovered an open bottle of bourbon under my passenger seat during a random vehicle inspection. Suddenly, I'm facing DUI charges despite being stone-cold sober and having witnesses who could verify my location all day. The restraining order she filed next was a work of fiction that would make Stephen King jealous. According to Vivian's sworn testimony, I had threatened her with military-style violence and demonstrated advanced tactical knowledge that poses an imminent threat to community safety. She claimed I described in detail how a combat veteran could neutralize multiple targets before law enforcement could respond. Complete fabrication, but it worked. The judge expanded the restraining order to cover the entire Willor development, effectively banning me from half my own county. I couldn't even drive past the community entrance without risking arrest. That's when our counterintelligence operation revealed Vivian's ultimate escape plan. Margaret's Bridge Club had outdone the CIA. Apparently, wine and gossip create the perfect environment for extracting classified information from loose-lipped conspirators. Vivian was planning to dissolve the HOA completely, liquidate all remaining assets, and disappear to Switzerland before criminal charges could be filed. Her timeline was aggressive. Transfer the remaining community funds to her personal accounts, claim the HOA voted to disband due to ongoing legal harassment, and board a one-way flight to Zurich within 72 hours. She'd already purchased the ticket using a credit card linked to the community pool maintenance fund. But while Vivian was planning her great escape, we were setting the perfect trap. Sarah had coordinated with federal prosecutors to time everything perfectly. The FBI financial crimes investigation would culminate in arrest warrants issued exactly 1 hour before Vivian's planned departure. Her Swiss bank accounts were already frozen, her assets under federal seizure orders, and her passport flagged for international monitoring. The media strategy was reaching crescendo. Our anonymous tips had sparked a full investigative series in the state newspaper about HOA corruption and veteran property theft. The contrast was perfect. War hero's family cemetery desecrated by corrupt suburban dictator. Public opinion had shifted so completely that Vivian couldn't show her face in town without getting hostile stares. Tom's veteran convoy had grown beyond our wildest expectations. Word had spread through military networks across 4 states about a sister in arms whose family legacy was under attack. Combat veterans, Purple Heart recipients, Gold Star families, they were coming to stand witness as justice was finally served. The sound of their motorcycles would announce that America still protects those who've sacrificed for her. The community rebellion reached critical mass when Vivian made her final desperate play. She offered to sell back 400 acres of my stolen land for $1.2 million, exactly what she'd paid for all 800 acres. This generous compromise for community peace required me to drop all criminal charges and civil lawsuits while allowing her to keep half my inheritance. Her threat was as pathetic as it was empty. Accept this deal, or I'll burn down the community center before I let you destroy everything I've built. The woman who'd spent years terrorizing her neighbors was now threatening arson to avoid consequences. But Margaret delivered the intelligence that sealed Vivian's fate. During their final bridge game, fortified by 3 glasses of wine, Vivian had confessed to forging the tax documents herself. She'd bragged about how easy it was to fool stupid government clerks and create fake delinquencies. Margaret had recorded the entire confession on her smartphone, capturing every incriminating detail in crystal-clear audio. The trap was set for tomorrow's community meeting. Vivian thought she was negotiating from strength, planning to present her final ultimatum before disappearing forever. She had no idea that FBI agents were already in position, that her escape routes were monitored, and that her own confession was about to be played before 200 witnesses. The sound of car doors slamming echoed through the night as the veteran convoy began arriving early, setting up a perimeter around the community center like we were securing a forward operating base. Tomorrow, Vivian would learn that when you steal from a veteran's family, justice doesn't just knock, it kicks down the door. The community center parking lot looked like a military operation at 6 p.m. sharp. 30 motorcycles and pickup trucks formed a precise perimeter, their American flag decals catching the evening light like battle standards. Combat veterans in leather jackets stood at attention, creating an honor guard that would make Arlington National Cemetery proud. These weren't weekend warriors. These were men and women who'd bled for the Constitution that Vivian had trampled. Inside, the tension was thick enough to cut with a bayonet. 200 residents packed every seat, with local media crews positioning cameras like they were covering a presidential debate. County Sheriff Mitchell positioned his deputies at every exit, officially for crowd control, but really to prevent a certain someone from making an unscheduled departure. Vivian arrived fashionably late in her white Mercedes, flanked by her $800 per hour attorney, whose briefcase probably costs more than most people's monthly salary. She strutted through the crowd like a queen addressing peasants, her designer suit and perfect makeup, a stark contrast to the working-class folks she'd been terrorizing for years. "Ladies and gentlemen," she began, her voice carrying that practiced politician's cadence that sounds sincere but feels like fingernails on a chalkboard. "I've called this meeting to resolve an unfortunate misunderstanding with our neighbor, Mr. Thornfield. Despite his military service, which we all respect, certain legal complexities require adult supervision." The condescension was so thick you could taste it. Here was a woman who'd stolen from her own neighbors, embezzled community funds, and committed federal crimes, lecturing a combat veteran about adult supervision. "I'm prepared to offer a generous settlement," she continued, pulling out a prepared statement. "Mr. Thornfield can repurchase 400 acres of the disputed property for $1.22 million, a significant discount that reflects our community's appreciation for veterans. In exchange, all legal proceedings will cease, and we can move forward in harmony." That's when I stood up, and the room fell silent except for the whisper of leather jackets shifting as 30 veterans straightened in their seats. "Vivian," I said, my voice carrying the calm authority that comes from facing real enemies in real combat. "I appreciate the offer, but before we discuss money, let's discuss ownership." I nodded to Sarah, who activated the projector with theatrical precision. The original 1,963 mineral rights documents filled the screen in glorious high definition, complete with my grandfather's signature and the county clerk's official seal. These documents prove that I own the subsurface rights beneath every mansion in Willoware Estates. I announced. "That means every foundation, every basement, every septic system sits on property that legally belongs to me." The gasps from the crowd sounded like air being sucked from the room. Real estate agent Patricia Wells, whose own house sat on my property, whispered, "Oh my God," loud enough for the back row to hear. "The current market value for purchasing these subsurface rights is $47 million. I continued, watching Vivian's face drain of color faster than her bank account. "Alternatively, all 50 homes can be relocated at an estimated cost of $15 million. Vivian's attorney was frantically packing his briefcase, probably calculating how quickly he could distance himself from this legal disaster. The sound of expensive Italian leather snapping shut echoed through the stunned silence. But I wasn't finished. "Since we're discussing property ownership, let's also discuss theft." Margaret stood up like a courtroom witness, her smartphone gleaming in her trembling hand. "I have a recording of Vivian confessing to forging tax documents and stealing veteran property. Would you like to hear it?" The audio was crystal clear. Vivian's wine-loosened voice bragging about how easy it was to fool stupid government clerks and create fake tax delinquencies. Every word was a nail in her legal coffin. That's when FBI agent Rodriguez stepped forward, his federal badge catching the fluorescent lights. "Vivian Ashworth, you're under arrest for wire fraud, conspiracy, embezzlement, and violations of the Service Members Civil Relief Act." The community center erupted like a stadium after a winning touchdown. Cameras flashed as Vivian's perfect composure finally cracked. She screamed about communist conspiracies and ungrateful neighbors, while Agent Rodriguez read her rights with professional calm. "This is persecution," she shrieked, struggling against the handcuffs. "I built this community. I protected property values. These people should be thanking me." Sheriff Mitchell stepped forward with his own warrant. "Ma'am, you're also under arrest for conspiracy, money laundering, and about 15 other charges we'll discuss downtown." The sound of handcuffs clicking shut was sweeter than church bells on Sunday morning. As they led Vivian away in shackles, her designer heels echoing on the linoleum floor, the veteran stood at attention in silent salute, not for her, but for justice finally served. Tom called out from the back of the room. That's how we handle enemies of America, folks. The standing ovation lasted 3 full minutes. Outside, the veteran convoy's motorcycle engines roared to life, their victory lap echoing through Willoware like freedom's own thunder. Justice moved swift and merciless. Vivian drew 5 years in federal prison, plus $2.1 million in restitution. Every stolen penny accounted for and returned with interest. The county assessor who'd helped orchestrate the fraud lost his pension, served 2 years, and was permanently disbarred from public service. Watching these parasites face real consequences felt better than Christmas morning after a year-long deployment. Within 6 months, my family's 1,500 acres were fully restored to legal ownership. The new HOA board, led by Margaret as president and Tom as treasurer, operated with radical transparency that would make government agencies jealous. Monthly financial reports, open book policies, and a constitutional amendment requiring unanimous board approval for any expenditure over $500. No more dictators, no more secret deals, just neighbors helping neighbors live in peace. The surface rights negotiation became a model for fair dealing. Instead of bankrupting 50 families to satisfy my desire for revenge, I sold the subsurface rights at 20% below market value. $8.2 million spread over 10 years with 0 interest. Call it a veteran's discount for people who'd been deceived by criminals. The Homeowners Association now actually serves homeowners instead of enriching board members. Personal healing came in unexpected ways. I built my new ranch house on the hill overlooking our family cemetery where I could see my grandfather's headstone every morning and evening. The rose garden was replanted with heritage varieties that filled the air with the same sweet fragrance I remembered from childhood visits. Those roses had survived one war. They damn sure survived one corrupt HOA president. The community transformation exceeded everyone's expectations. Margaret's presidency brought competence and kindness to HOA management. Tom organized monthly veteran support groups that helped former soldiers navigate property rights issues before they became legal disasters. Our library workshops expanded statewide, teaching citizens how to protect themselves from municipal corruption and HOA abuse. Local newspaper editor Patricia Kane won a state journalism award for her investigative series on HOA corruption, proving that small-town reporting can still change lives when journalists choose truth over access. Her coverage inspired legislative reforms requiring HOA financial audits and criminal background checks for board candidates. But the crown jewel of our victory was the Thornfield Veteran Scholarship Fund established with $500,000 from the settlement proceeds. This program supports children of deployed service members through college, ensuring military families never have to choose between serving their country and securing their children's future. In 5 years, we've funded 47 students, including 3 who've gone on to military MIs and 2 who became veterans' rights attorneys. Our annual fundraising gala brings the entire community together at the restored ranch, where combat veterans and suburban neighbors share barbecue and swap stories under the same stars my grandfather once watched. Margaret organizes silent auctions featuring local artwork, while Tom leads tours of the memorial garden we created for all county veterans. Even former Willowmere residents who initially resented me now contribute generously to honor their neighbors who've served. The legal precedent from my case became required reading in law schools nationwide. And Sarah Chun now travels the country teaching property rights seminars at veterans organizations. The Thornfield Doctrine protects military families from predatory local governments and corrupt HOAs, ensuring no veteran returns from deployment to find their inheritance stolen. Personal happiness found me when I least expected it. I married Janet Morrison, the librarian who'd helped research those crucial property documents in the early days of our fight. We adopted 2 children whose Marine father died in Afghanistan, giving them the stable home and family legacy that every military child deserves. Our ranch operates as both a working cattle operation and a retreat center where veterans find peace among people who understand their sacrifices. The phone call came last Tuesday. A Marine sergeant from California whose city was trying to seize his family farm through eminent domain abuse. "Sir, I heard what you did in Willowmere," he said, his voice carrying the same desperation I'd felt 3 years ago. "Could you help me fight these bastards, looking across my wall of thank you letters from veterans nationwide, Purple Heart recipients, Gold Star families, and combat survivors who'd reclaimed their stolen property using our legal playbook. I felt my grandfather's proud smile warming the room. Son, I told him, pack your legal documents and get ready for war. Justice isn't finished yet. The sound of children laughing in the restored rose garden drifted through my office window, mixing with the gentle melody of Grandpa's wind chimes. Some battles end with surrender. Others end with victory so complete that the enemy's defeat becomes everyone else's liberation. This is what happens when David doesn't just beat Goliath. He teaches every other David how to use a slingshot. Drop a comment about your worst HOA nightmare. Let's expose these petty tyrants together. Hit that subscribe button if you want more stories of underdogs who fought back and won. Thank you for tuning in to HOA Stories, where neighbors stand up against HOA Karens and karma comes a-knocking. If you like this story, hit that like button, share your thoughts below, and subscribe for more HOA tales and real-life neighborhood drama each week.